The gunshot cracked through the afternoon air like thunder, and Eleanor Ramsey felt the stagecoach lurch to a violent stop that sent her careening into the passenger across from her, a portly banker who smelled of cigars and sweat. It was September 1883, and the journey from Salt Lake City to St. George, Utah had been uneventful until that moment. Eleanor had been watching the red rock formations rise like ancient sentinels against the brilliant blue sky, thinking about the teaching position waiting for her at the newly established schoolhouse. At 23 years old, she had finally saved enough money to leave her cramped life in the city and start fresh in the growing town, nestled in Utah's southwestern corner. Everything she owned was packed into 2 leather trunks strapped to the top of the coach, and her reticule held the last of her savings, her mother's pearl necklace and a daguerreotype of her late parents. "Everyone out. Hands where we can see them." The voice was rough, muffled by what she imagined was a bandana. Through the dusty window, Eleanor could see 3 men on horseback, their faces indeed covered, rifles pointed at the driver and the guard who had already raised their hands in surrender. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the door was wrenched open. A tall figure in a dirty brown duster gestured with his pistol. "Come on out, nice and slow. Any funny business and someone gets hurt." Eleanor's legs trembled as she descended the steps. The heat of the Utah desert hit her immediately, so different from the cooler mountain air they had left behind that morning. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, sage brush and red sand punctuated by those magnificent rock formations that now seemed menacing rather than beautiful. The nearest town was miles behind them, and St. George was still hours away. The banker stumbled out after her, followed by a traveling salesman and an elderly woman who clutched a carpet bag to her chest. The bandits moved with practiced efficiency, one keeping his rifle trained on the driver and guard while the other 2 approached the passengers. Valuables. Now. The closest bandit held out a canvas sack, and Eleanor watched the banker drop his pocket watch and wallet into it with shaking hands. When it was her turn, she fumbled with the strings of her reticule, her fingers clumsy with fear. "I do not have much," she said quietly, hating how her voice wavered. "Just enough to start my new position." "That is real touching, lady. Hand it over anyway." The bandit's eyes were cold above his bandana, a pale blue that seemed devoid of empathy. Eleanor dropped her small purse into the sack, watching her mother's pearls disappear into the darkness of the bag. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of these men. "Check the top," the leader called out, and one of the bandits climbed up to the luggage. Eleanor heard the sound of her trunks being opened, her carefully folded clothes and books being ransacked. A sob caught in her throat as she saw her belongings tossed carelessly to the ground, her few precious possessions scattered in the red dust. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The bandits mounted their horses, the leader firing a shot into the air that made everyone flinch. "Stay put for 20 minutes or the next one goes through someone." They thundered away in a cloud of dust, heading toward the rocky hills to the east. Eleanor sank to her knees in the dirt, staring at the destruction of her carefully packed life. Books lay splayed open, their pages already gathering sand. Her dresses, simple calico and wool, were strewn across the ground. Even her undergarments had been dumped out, a violation that made her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Miss, are you hurt?" The driver had climbed down, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "No," she managed to say, though her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. "No, I am not hurt," but she was. Not physically, perhaps, but the loss of her mother's necklace felt like losing her parents all over again. And the the money she had saved for over a year, working as a seamstress in a shop where the owner paid barely enough to cover her boarding house room. All of it gone. The elderly woman helped her gather her clothes while the salesman and banker collected their own scattered belongings. The driver and guard debated whether to continue or turn back, their voices low and worried. Eleanor folded her dresses mechanically, trying not to think about how she would pay for lodging when she arrived in St. George, how she would eat until her first wages came through. They were just repacking the trunks when Eleanor heard it, the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop. Everyone froze, the driver reaching for the rifle the bandits had left him. But the rider who appeared around the bend in the road was alone, and as he drew closer, Eleanor could see he wore no bandana over his face. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a black hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse was a magnificent roan, and he rode with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than off. As he approached, he slowed to a trot, his hand raised in a peaceful gesture. "Saw the dust cloud from the ridge," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "Figured there might be trouble. Everyone all right?" The driver lowered his rifle slightly. "Stagecoach robbery. They took off maybe 15 minutes ago, heading east." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, and Eleanor got her first clear look at him. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes so brown they were almost black. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with strong features and a jaw shadowed by a few days of stubble. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen considerable use. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "Name is Nathan Ellis," he said, his gaze sweeping over the group before settling on Eleanor, still kneeling in the dirt with an armful of her clothing. Something flickered in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "I've been tracking those three for near about a week now. They hit a freight wagon north of here 5 days back." "You are a lawman?" the banker asked, hope creeping into his voice. Nathan shook his head. "Rancher. But they stole 40 head of cattle from my family's spread, and I aim to get them back. The robbery, well, that is just more incentive to catch up with them." He looked at Eleanor again, and this time his eyes held a question. "They hurt anyone?" "No," Eleanor said, finally finding her voice. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "But they took everything of value. My savings, my mother's jewelry, and all the confidence I had that coming to Utah was the right decision." She had not meant to say that last part, and heat flooded her face. But something about Nathan Ellis made her want to speak honestly, to drop the polite facade she usually maintained. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes, or the way he looked at her like she was a person rather than just another victim. "How many?" he asked the driver. "3, all armed. Headed east toward the rock formations." Nathan nodded slowly, his hand resting on his gun belt. "I know that country. Lots of places to hide, but not much water. They will have to head for Red Creek eventually." He turned back to Eleanor, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "What did they take from you, miss, specifically?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "A small leather purse with $37, a pearl necklace that belonged to my mother. It has a silver clasp with her initials engraved, and a daguerreotype in a brass frame. That is all." "That is not all," Nathan said quietly. "That is your whole life, near enough." He paused, seeming to make a decision. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face, warming those dark eyes and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Well, miss, I aim to get it back for you. Including," and here he tipped his hat, that smile turning almost mischievous, "your heart, please." Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. My what? Your heart. Nathan's smile widened. You said you lost confidence in coming to Utah. That is a matter of the heart, I figure. So I will get back your belongings and your confidence, all of it. The banker snorted. 1 man against 3, that is foolish talk. Nathan did not look away from Eleanor. Maybe so, but I have been accused of worse things than foolishness. He walked over to his horse, checking his saddle bags and the rifle in his scabbard. Driver, you get these folks to St. George safe. I will catch up with you in a few days. Wait. Eleanor surprised herself by speaking. You do not even know me. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger's belongings? Nathan paused, one hand on his saddle horn. When he looked at her, there was something in his expression she could not quite name, a combination of determination and something softer, something that made her breath catch. Because someone helped my mother once, when my father died and left her with nothing but debt and 3 young boys to feed. A stranger gave her a job and a place to live, asked for nothing in return. She always said that kindness creates more kindness, like ripples in water. He swung up into his saddle. Besides, you look like the kind of person who would do the same for someone else. Am I wrong? Eleanor found she could not speak around the sudden lump in her throat, so she just shook her head. Then I will see you in St. George, miss. He waited, eyebrows raised. Ramsey, Eleanor Ramsey. Miss Ramsey. Nathan touched his hat brim again, that devastating smile flashing once more. Try not to worry too much. I am fairly good at this kind of thing. Then he was gone, his roan kicking up dust as he galloped east following the trail of the bandits. Eleanor watched until he disappeared behind a massive red rock formation, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating far too quickly. Romantic fool, the banker muttered, climbing back into the stagecoach. He will get himself killed, and for what? $37 and some old jewelry. But the elderly woman smiled at Eleanor as she helped her up into the coach. Do not mind him, dear. I think that young man has just given you something worth more than money. What is that? Eleanor asked, settling into her seat as the driver called to the horses. Hope, the woman said simply. The rest of the journey passed in a blur. Eleanor tried to read one of the books that had survived the robbery mostly intact, but she found herself staring at the same page for miles, her mind replaying those few minutes with Nathan Ellis. The way he had looked at her, the confidence in his voice when he promised to recover her belongings. That smile. She told herself not to be foolish. She did not know anything about him beyond his name and his profession. He could be married, for all she knew, with a wife and children waiting at his ranch. The thought made her stomach twist in a way that was entirely inappropriate given that she had known him for all of 15 minutes. But then she remembered the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her kneeling in the dirt, the gentle tone he had used, and that parting line about her heart. What kind of man said something like that to a woman he had just met? A foolish one, according to the banker. But Eleanor thought perhaps it took a different kind of courage to be open and earnest in a world that so often rewarded cynicism and self-interest. St. George appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The town was small but growing, with wide streets laid out in the orderly Mormon fashion and buildings of red sandstone that glowed like copper in the late afternoon light. The Virgin River ran along the southern edge of town, providing the water that allowed this desert settlement to flourish. Trees lined the main street, their leaves just beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. The stagecoach pulled up in front of the Wells Fargo office, and Eleanor descended on shaky legs. She had been sitting for hours, but her body felt like it had been running the entire time, her nerves stretched taut with worry and an emotion she did not want to name. The station manager, a round man named Mr. Peterson, listened to the driver's account of the robbery with increasingly deep frowns. "This is the third coach hit this month," he said, shaking his head. "Sheriff Thompson is going to have a fit. You all will need to file reports." Eleanor answered his questions mechanically, describing the bandits and what they had taken. When Mr. Peterson asked about Nathan Ellis, she found herself defending his decision to pursue them alone, though she could not have said exactly why it mattered to her that these strangers think well of him. "Nathan Ellis." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "I know that family. Good people. The mother, Sarah, she runs a successful ranch about 12 miles north of here. Her boys all work the land with her. Nathan is the oldest, I believe. Solid man. If anyone can track those bandits, it would be him." The information settled something anxious in Eleanor's chest. He was real then, not just some romantic dream she had conjured from the stress of the robbery. And he was known here, respected. "Now then, Miss Ramsey," Mr. Peterson said, consulting a ledger. "You were supposed to meet with Principal Harding at the schoolhouse. I can send someone to let him know you have arrived, and he can help you get settled." Eleanor looked down at her dusty, travel-stained dress. "I must look a fright." "You look like someone who just survived a robbery," the elderly woman from the coach said firmly. She had given her name as Mrs. Patterson, and she seemed to have appointed herself Eleanor's temporary guardian. "Anyone with sense will make allowances." Principal Harding turned out to be a thin, scholarly man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a kind manner. He expressed appropriate concern over the robbery, then walked Eleanor through the dusty streets to a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had been one of the Chinese laborers who helped build the railroad before settling in St. George. "Miss Ramsey will need a room," Principal Harding explained to the small, iron-haired woman who answered their knock. "Unfortunately, there was a robbery, and her funds were stolen. I can guarantee payment once school board funds come through next week." Mrs. Chen looked Eleanor up and down with sharp black eyes, then nodded. "Come in. You look like you need tea and food, not just a room." The boarding house was simple but spotlessly clean, with whitewashed walls and windows that let in the warm afternoon light. Mrs. Chen showed Eleanor to a small room on the second floor, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. "You rest," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "I will bring food." Eleanor wanted to protest that she could come down to the dining room, but the truth was that her legs felt like water and her hands were still trembling. As soon as Mrs. Chen left, she sank onto the bed and finally, let herself cry. She cried for her parents, gone these 3 years but still missed every single day. She cried for her mother's necklace, the last tangible piece of her family. She cried for the savings that represented months of pinched meals and patched clothes. And she cried from the sheer, overwhelming uncertainty of it all, of being in a strange town with almost nothing to her name, dependent on the kindness of people who owed her nothing. When the tears finally stopped, Eleanor felt hollow but calmer. She washed her face in the basin, wincing at her reflection in the small mirror. Her blonde hair had come loose from its careful pins, and her blue eyes were red-rimmed. But there was something in her expression that had not been there before, a determination that surprised her. She would not fall apart. She would teach her students and earn her keep and rebuild what had been taken from her. And if Nathan Ellis managed to recover her belongings, well, that would be a blessing she had not dared to pray for. Mrs. Chen's promised meal turned out to be a hearty soup with vegetables and chicken, fresh bread, and tea that tasted of jasmine. Eleanor ate in her room, suddenly ravenous, and felt strength returning to her body with each bite. Afterward, She unpacked what remained of her belongings, hanging her dresses to air out and arranging her surviving books on the dresser. That night, she lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of St. George settling into evening. Voices drifted up from the street, someone's laughter, a dog barking in the distance. And somewhere out there in the darkness, Nathan Ellis was tracking 3 dangerous men through country he knew, risking his life to recover belongings that meant everything to her, but that he could have easily dismissed as not worth the danger. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally did, Eleanor dreamed of dark eyes and a dimpled smile, of a man on a roan horse riding toward her through red dust and golden light. The next 3 days passed in a strange mixture of busyness and waiting. Principal Harding introduced Eleanor to the schoolhouse, a new building that still smelled of fresh lumber and paint. She met the other teacher, a middle-aged woman named Miss Adelaide Porter, who taught the younger children while Eleanor would handle the older students. Together they reviewed lesson plans and prepared the classroom for the start of term, which was just a week away. Eleanor threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. But every time she heard hoofbeats on the street, her heart would leap and she would turn toward the window, hoping to see a tall rider on a roan horse. Each time, disappointment would settle heavy in her chest when it proved to be someone else. Mrs. Chen proved to be more than just a landlady. She seemed to sense Eleanor's worry, though Eleanor had not spoken of it. On the second evening, she brought tea to Eleanor's room and sat down without being invited, her small hands wrapped around her own cup. "You are thinking of the cowboy," she said. It was not a question. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am worried about him. He is risking his life for my belongings. That is all." Mrs. Chen made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been skepticism. "My husband, when I first met him, he did something foolish too. He stood up to a foreman who was cheating the workers. Could have been fired, could have been hurt. But he did it because it was right, and because I was one of the workers being cheated." She smiled, her weathered face softening with memory. "Men who do foolish, brave things, they are worth knowing." "I do not really know him," Eleanor protested. "We spoke for only a few minutes. Sometimes a few minutes is enough to see a person's heart." Mrs. Chen stood, collecting the tea cups. "You will see him again, I feel it." Eleanor wanted to believe her, but as the third day turned into evening with no word, she began to wonder if Nathan Ellis had been another casualty of the wild country and the lawless men who roamed it. The thought made her feel physically ill. She was helping Miss Porter arrange primers on the students' desks when they heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, excited chatter, and then someone running past the schoolhouse shouting, "Sheriff Thompson is bringing in the bandits. They caught them." Eleanor's hands stilled on the books. Miss Porter, who knew the whole story, touched her arm gently. "Go on. I can finish here." Eleanor did not remember walking to the sheriff's office. One moment she was in the schoolhouse, and the next she was part of the crowd gathering on the main street, watching as Sheriff Thompson, a burly man with a thick mustache, escorted 3 handcuffed prisoners toward the jailhouse. The bandits looked considerably worse for wear, dusty and defeated, with what looked like fresh bruises on their faces. And behind them, riding that magnificent roan horse, was Nathan Ellis. Relief flooded through Eleanor with such force that she had to grab the porch post to steady herself. He was alive. He was here. And judging by the saddle bags bulging behind him and the canvas sack in his hand, he had succeeded. Nathan dismounted, spoke briefly with the sheriff, and handed over the canvas sack. Then his eyes scanned the crowd, and when they found Eleanor, his entire face lit up with that smile that made her heart stutter. He walked toward her, the crowd parting like water, and Eleanor found herself moving to meet him. They stopped just a few feet apart, close enough that she could see the dust on his clothes and the tiredness around his eyes, but also the satisfaction of a job well done. "Miss Ramsey," he said, and his voice was warm, pleased. "I believe I have something that belongs to you." He opened the saddle bag and pulled out her leather reticule. Eleanor took it with shaking hands, opening it to find her money, her mother's pearls, and the daguerreotype all safely inside. The tears that sprang to her eyes were ones of joy this time, not sorrow. "I do not know how to thank you," she managed to say. You have given me back more than you know." Nathan's expression softened. "I am glad I could help." He reached up and removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "It was a bit more exciting than I anticipated." They had holed up in a canyon near Red Creek, but they were not expecting anyone to track them that quickly. Sheriff Thompson and I convinced them that surrender was preferable to being shot. "Were you hurt?" The question burst out before Eleanor could stop it, and she found herself scanning him for injuries. "Just some scrapes and a sore shoulder from sleeping on rocks." Nathan's smile turned gentle. "I have had worse from breaking horses." Sheriff Thompson called out, "Ellis, I need your statement whenever you are done being a hero." Nathan grimaced good-naturedly, but did not immediately move. Instead, he looked at Eleanor with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Ramsey, I realize this is presumptuous, and you have every right to refuse, but would you perhaps allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean. When you have had time to settle in, and I have had time to wash the trail dust off." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she was certain everyone in the street could hear it. "I would like that very much, Mr. Ellis." "Nathan," he corrected. "Please, Nathan." The name felt right on her tongue, intimate. "And you should call me Eleanor, Eleanor." He said it slowly, like he was tasting it, and his smile deepened. "That is a beautiful name, suits you." "Ellis, I am not getting any younger over here." Sheriff Thompson sounded more amused than annoyed. Nathan laughed, settling his hat back on his head. "Duty calls." "But I will see you soon, Eleanor. I promise." She watched him walk to the sheriff's office, her reticule clutched to her chest like a treasure. Around her, the crowd was dispersing, people heading back to their interrupted dinners and evening routines. But Eleanor stood there for a long moment, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. Mrs. Chen was waiting on the boarding house porch when Eleanor returned, her expression knowing. "The cowboy, he came back." "He did." Eleanor could not stop smiling. "And he is going to call on me." "Good." Mrs. Chen nodded with satisfaction. "Now you can stop staring out windows like a lost soul." Eleanor laughed, surprised by the sound of her own joy. Was I that obvious? Only to anyone with eyes. But Mrs. Chen was smiling too. "Come, you need to eat. And then perhaps we can make sure your dresses are properly pressed for when this cowboy comes calling." True to his word, Nathan appeared at the boarding house 2 days later, freshly shaven and wearing clean clothes that had clearly been selected with care. His dark hair was still damp from washing, curling slightly at his collar, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. Eleanor had chosen her best dress, a modest blue calico that matched her eyes, and Mrs. Chen had helped her arrange her hair in a becoming style. "Miss Eleanor," Nathan said when Mrs. Chen showed him into the small parlor, "you look lovely." "Thank you." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Would you like to sit?" Mrs. Chen made lemonade. They sat in the stiff back chairs that were all the boarding house parlor offered, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Chen, who settled herself in the corner with some mending. But if Nathan was bothered by the lack of privacy, he did not show it. Instead, he seemed content to tell Eleanor about the capture of the bandits, filling in details he had omitted during their brief exchange on the street. "They were not particularly clever criminals," he explained. Just desperate men who thought robbing coaches would be easier than honest work. Turns out they were wrong on both counts. "And the cattle they stole from your ranch?" Eleanor asked. "Most of them recovered, thank goodness. My mother was ready to ride out after them herself if I had not." Nathan's expression turned fond. "She is a formidable woman. Raised 3 boys mostly on her own after my father died. That must have been difficult." Eleanor thought of her own parents, of how lost she had felt after their deaths even though she had been an adult. "How old were you when he passed?" 12. "My brothers were 10 and 8. Nathan's voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear the old grief beneath it. "It was hard. We almost lost the ranch, but my mother, she refused to give up. Worked harder than any man I have ever known, taught us to do the same." "She sounds remarkable," Eleanor said sincerely. "She is. And she is going to like you." Nathan paused as if surprised by his own words. "I mean, I hope you will have the chance to meet her, if you would like." Eleanor smiled. "I would like that very much." They talked for an hour, the conversation flowing easily despite Mrs. Chen's watchful presence. Nathan asked about Eleanor's plans for teaching, and she found herself describing her hopes for her students, her belief that education could open doors that might otherwise remain closed. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. In turn, Eleanor learned about the Ellis Ranch, about Nathan's brothers James and Henry who helped run the operation, about the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Utah climate. Nathan spoke about the land with a passion that was infectious, describing the red rock formations and hidden canyons with the love of someone who had spent his life exploring them. When it was time for Nathan to leave, he stood reluctantly. "May I call on you again? Perhaps we could take a walk if that would be proper. I would like to show you some of the prettier parts of St. George." "I would enjoy that," Eleanor said, walking him to the door. "Thank you for coming, Nathan." He took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "Thank you for letting me. I will be back in 2 days, if that is acceptable. I need to spend tomorrow helping my brothers with some fence repairs." 2 days is fine. Eleanor was acutely aware of his hand holding hers, the calluses on his palm from years of hard work, the strength in his fingers. "I will be here." After he left, Mrs. Chen looked up from her mending with a slight smile. "That one, he has good manners, and he looks at you like you are the sun." Eleanor pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. "You are exaggerating. I am old, not blind." Mrs. Chen's smile widened. "You look at him the same way." Eleanor could not deny it, so she did not try. Instead, she went to her room and carefully took out the daguerreotype of her parents, tracing their faces with gentle fingers. "I think you would like him," she whispered to their frozen smiles. "I think you would approve." The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both thrilling and comforting. Nathan came to call every few days, constrained by his ranch duties, but clearly making time for Eleanor whenever he could. They took walks along the Virgin River, Nathan pointing out the cottonwoods and willows, the birds that nested in the reeds. He showed her the old fort that the settlers had built when they first came to the valley, and the tabernacle with its distinctive tower. Eleanor, for her part, had thrown herself into teaching. The school year had begun, and her classroom filled each day with 15 students ranging from 12 to 17 years old. She loved the work, loved seeing understanding dawn in a student's eyes, loved the challenge of making subjects like history and literature come alive for young people who had spent most of their lives focused on the practical necessities of frontier living. Nathan came to her first school program in October, where the students recited poetry and performed a short play. He sat in the back with his hat on his knee, beaming with pride, and afterward told her she was a natural teacher. The compliment meant more to Eleanor than she could express, because it showed he valued not just her, but also the work that mattered to her. As autumn deepened and the cottonwoods along the river turned gold, Nathan finally invited Eleanor to visit the Ellis ranch and meet his mother. Eleanor accepted with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She wanted Nathan's family to like her, wanted them to see her as she hoped Nathan did, as someone worthy of his attention and affection. The ranch lay to the north of St. George, nestled in a valley between red rock cliffs that glowed like fire in the morning sun. The house was a long, low building of adobe and stone, with a wide porch and corrals spread out behind. Cattle dotted the valley, moving slowly through the sage brush, and horses grazed in a fenced pasture near the barn. Sarah Ellis proved to be exactly as Eleanor had imagined. A tall, strong-boned woman with gray, streaked brown hair and eyes the same warm brown as Nathan's. She welcomed Eleanor with a firm handshake and an appraising look that missed nothing, but her smile was genuine. "So you are the teacher my son cannot stop talking about," Sarah said, ushering Eleanor into a kitchen that smelled wonderfully of baking bread and coffee. "He tells me you survived a robbery with grace and courage. That speaks well of your character." "I am not sure about grace," Eleanor said honestly. "I was terrified, but Nathan he was extraordinary. I do not know if I properly thanked him." "Oh, I think you have thanked him just fine." Sarah's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I have not seen him this happy since before his father died. You have given him something to look forward to besides fixing fences and chasing stray cattle." Nathan's brothers were younger versions of him, though James at 24 had lighter hair and Henry at 22 was stockier in build. Both were polite, but clearly curious about the woman who had captured their eldest brother's attention. The family meal was lively, full of good-natured teasing and stories about ranch mishaps, and Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months. After lunch, Nathan took Eleanor on a tour of the ranch, pointing out the improvements they had made over the years, the new barn they were building, the water system they had engineered to irrigate their small garden plot. But eventually, they found themselves at a spot overlooking the valley, a flat rock beneath a twisted juniper tree where the view stretched for miles. "I used to come here as a boy," Nathan said, helping Eleanor settle on the sun-warmed stone. "When things got hard after my father died, I would ride up here and just look at all this. It helped me remember what we were fighting for." Eleanor looked out at the red rocks and endless sky, the stark beauty of the desert that had seemed so alien just weeks ago but now was beginning to feel like home. "It is beautiful, harsh but beautiful. Like you," Nathan said quietly. Eleanor turned to him in surprise. "Harsh?" "No, not harsh, strong." Nathan was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You have been through difficult things, Eleanor, loss and grief and starting over in a strange place. But you have not let it break you. You have kept your kindness, your hope. That is strength." "That is beautiful." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "I do not always feel strong. Sometimes I feel like I am barely holding myself together. That is when you are being strongest." Nathan reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Eleanor, I know we have not known each other long, just a couple of months, but I need you to know something. When I saw you kneeling in the dust that day, gathering up the pieces of your life, I felt something shift in my chest, like something that had been locked up opened. And every time I have seen you since, that feeling has gotten stronger." Eleanor could barely breathe. "Nathan, I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen. I think about you constantly, when I am working, when I am riding, when I am trying to sleep. You are there in my thoughts, and I know it is fast. I know you might need more time, but I could not keep pretending I do not feel this way." The words Eleanor had been holding back for weeks burst free. "I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible and practical. But Nathan, when you rode away after the robbery, I was terrified something would happen to you. And when you came back, I realized I had been holding my breath the entire time. You make me feel, I do not know, alive. Like I am more myself when I am with you." Nathan's smile was incandescent. "Really? Really?" Eleanor laughed through the tears that were suddenly flowing down her cheeks. "I am in love with you, Nathan Ellis. Completely and impractically in love with you." Nathan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "There is nothing impractical about love. It is the most practical thing there is." Then he leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor's first kiss was everything she had dreamed it might be and more. Nathan's lips were gentle on hers, asking rather than demanding, and she felt the kiss all the way to her toes. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me and go to sleep every night holding you. I want to build a life with you, Eleanor, a real life, here in this valley." Eleanor's heart felt so full it might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too, all of it." They sat on that rock until the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, making plans and dreaming together. Nathan wanted to build Eleanor her own house, separate from the main ranch house, where they could have privacy but still be close to his family. Eleanor talked about continuing to teach as long as she could, about eventually having children who would grow up with books and learning, and the wide open spaces of the ranch. When Nathan finally took her back to St. George as the evening stars were beginning to appear, Eleanor felt like she was floating. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. She was going to marry Nathan Ellis. She was going to spend her life with this good, brave, honest man who had given her back so much more than her stolen belongings. Mrs. Chen took one look at Eleanor's face when she arrived at the boarding house and smiled. "He asked you then?" "He did." Eleanor could not stop smiling. "I am going to be married, Mrs. Chen." "Of course you are." Mrs. Chen patted Eleanor's hand. "I knew this the first day you met him. Some things are written in the stars." They decided on a January wedding, giving Eleanor time to finish the fall school term, and Nathan time to complete the house he insisted on building. In the months that followed, Eleanor divided her time between teaching and visiting the ranch, where she watched the small adobe house take shape under Nathan's skilled hands. He built it with help from his brothers, with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, and a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Sarah welcomed Eleanor into the family with open arms, teaching her about ranch life and sharing stories about Nathan's childhood that made him blush and his brothers howl with laughter. Eleanor, who had been alone for so long, found herself part of a boisterous, loving family that accepted her completely. Principal Harding was understanding about Eleanor's impending marriage, though he asked if she would consider continuing to teach for a while after the wedding. "Good teachers are hard to find out here," he said, "and the students adore you." Eleanor agreed with Nathan's blessing. She loved teaching, and the ranch was close enough that she could make the journey several times a week. Nathan was building her a small desk in their new house, where she could prepare lessons and grade papers. As winter settled over southern Utah, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional snow to the higher elevations, Eleanor found herself happier than she had been since before her parents' deaths. The pain of their loss was still there, would always be there, but it was gentled now by the joy of her present and the promise of her future. On Christmas Eve, Nathan gave her a present. A new frame for the daguerreotype of her parents, carved from juniper wood with intricate detail. "So they can see your new life," he said softly. "So they can be part of it." Eleanor cried and kissed him and held him tight, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. In return, she gave him a book of poetry she had painstakingly copied out by hand, including all his favorite verses from the evenings they had spent reading together. The wedding took place on a clear, cold day in mid-January 1884. The small church in St. George was packed with people: Nathan's family, Eleanor's students and their parents, the teachers and shopkeepers and ranch families who had become Eleanor's friends in the months since her arrival. Mrs. Chen had helped Eleanor sew her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored silk that had been her one extravagance. Nathan stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving Eleanor as she walked down the aisle. When she reached him, he took her hands and smiled that dimpled smile that still made her heart flutter. The minister spoke the words of the ceremony, but Eleanor barely heard them. She was lost in Nathan's eyes, in the promises they were making to each other, in the sheer rightness of this moment. When it came time for the vows, Nathan's voice was strong and clear. "I promise to love you all the days of my life, to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to build a home with you, a family with you, a future with you. You are my heart, Eleanor, and I will spend every day proving myself worthy of yours." Eleanor's voice trembled but did not break. "I promise to love you with everything I am, to be your partner in all things, to build our life together with hope and courage and joy. You gave me back not just my belongings but my faith in the goodness of people. You are my home, Nathan, and I will love you forever." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that made several women in the congregation sigh. Then they were walking back down the aisle together, hand in hand, smiling so broadly their faces hurt. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the largest barn and food enough to feed half the county. There was music and dancing, and Eleanor danced first with Nathan, then with each of his brothers, and finally with Principal Harding, who told her gravely that Nathan was a lucky man. "I am the lucky one," Eleanor said, watching Nathan laughing with some of the ranchers. "I came to Utah with nothing but hope and a teaching position, and I found, well, everything." As the evening wore on and the stars came out in force, Nathan and Eleanor slipped away from the party. Their new house waited for them, warm and welcoming, with a fire already laid in the hearth and lamps glowing in the windows. Nathan carried Eleanor over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the parlor. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ellis," he said softly. "Home," Eleanor repeated, looking around at the house Nathan had built with his own hands, at the furniture they had chosen together, at the books lined up on the shelf, and the daguerreotype of her parents in its beautiful frame. "Yes, this is home." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Nathan held Eleanor close and whispered promises into her hair. Promises of forever, of children and grandchildren, of growing old together in this house and on this land. And Eleanor believed every word, because she had learned that Nathan Ellis was a man who kept his promises. The years that followed were not without their challenges. Ranch life was hard, demanding work from sunup to sundown. There were droughts that tested everyone's endurance, and hard winters that took a toll on the cattle. Eleanor continued teaching for 3 years, until the birth of their first child made the journey too difficult. Their son arrived in the spring of 1886, a healthy boy with Nathan's dark hair and Eleanor's blue eyes. They named him Samuel, after Nathan's father, and Eleanor fell in love all over again watching Nathan hold their tiny son with such gentle reverence. "He is perfect," Nathan said, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how blessed I am." Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband. "We are both blessed." Samuel was followed by a daughter, Rose, 2 years later, and then another son, William, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious became wonderfully crowded with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Nathan proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving, teaching his children to ride and rope and care for the animals, while Eleanor taught them to read and write and love learning. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Ellis family. Nathan and his brothers expanded the herd and improved their breeding stock. Sarah remained the matriarch, wise and strong, doting on her grandchildren and offering advice when asked. James married a girl from Cedar City and built his own house on the ranch property. And eventually, Henry followed suit with a schoolteacher from St. George who became one of Eleanor's closest friends. Through it all, Nathan and Eleanor's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course, as all couples do. But they never went to bed angry, and they never forgot to tell each other, "I love you," every single day. On their 10th anniversary, Nathan took Eleanor back to the rock overlooking the valley where he had first told her he loved her. "Do you remember this place?" he asked, helping her up onto the sun-warmed stone just as he had that day so long ago. "Of course," Eleanor said, settling beside him. "This is where you told me you were falling in love with me." "Where we both admitted we were in love," Nathan corrected. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate ring set with a sapphire the color of Eleanor's eyes. "I could not afford much when we married, but I have been saving, and I wanted to give you something that matches your beauty." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger beside her simple gold wedding band. "It is beautiful, but Nathan, you have given me so much more than jewelry. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "You saved my life too," Nathan said seriously. "Maybe not from bandits or physical danger, but after my father died, I spent years just going through the motions. Working, sleeping, working again. I did not let myself hope for more because it seemed safer not to want things. Then you came into my life, and suddenly I wanted everything. A wife, children, a home filled with love and laughter. You showed me it was safe to hope again." They sat together as the sun made its slow journey across the sky, watching their children play in the valley below under Sarah's watchful eye. Samuel was 12 now, already skilled with horses and showing signs of becoming as good a rancher as his father. Rose was 10, with her mother's love of books and her father's stubbornness. William at 8 was the family charmer, able to talk his way out of any trouble. "Do you think you will ever regret it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Marrying a woman you barely knew, tying your life to mine after just a few months." Nathan turned to her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away even after 10 years. Not for a single second. "You are the best decision I ever made, Eleanor Ellis. The very best." As they grew older, their love did not diminish but transformed. The passion of youth mellowed into something deeper, steadier, a love built on years of shared joys and weathered sorrows. They lost Sarah when Eleanor was 42, and Nathan grieved his mother's passing with Eleanor's steadfast support. They celebrated as their children grew and married and brought grandchildren to fill the house with noise and chaos once more. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Nathan to slow down a bit as his joints grew stiffer and his hair turned silver. Rose shocked everyone by moving to Salt Lake City to attend the university, but she returned often with books and new ideas that she shared eagerly with her still curious mother. William became a veterinarian, one of the first in southern Utah, and set up practice in St. George while still helping on the ranch when needed. Eleanor, for her part, never truly gave up teaching. She tutored children on the ranch and in town, started a lending library in their parlor that grew to include hundreds of books, and taught her grandchildren with the same patience and enthusiasm she had shown her first students. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch. The barn was decorated with ribbons and flowers, and there was music and dancing just like at their wedding. Nathan, his hair silver but his smile still as charming as ever, led Eleanor onto the makeshift dance floor. 30 years, he said, pulling her close. And I love you more now than I did the day I married you. That is impossible, Eleanor teased, her own hair more gray than gold now but her eyes still bright with love. You said I was your heart on our wedding day. How can you love me more than your heart? Because now you are also my soul, Nathan said simply. You are woven into every part of me, Eleanor, every memory, every hope, every dream. We have built a life together, a family, a legacy. And it is all because I was lucky enough to ride past a robbery at exactly the right moment. Eleanor laughed through happy tears. I think I am the lucky one. I lost everything that day, or so I thought, but I gained so much more. I gained you. As they danced, their children and grandchildren watching with smiles and tears of their own, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Utah 30 years ago with nothing but a teaching position and a hope for a fresh start. She had been robbed of her meager belongings and left uncertain of her future. But then Nathan Ellis had ridden into her life with his confident smile and his promise to recover not just her possessions but her heart. And he had kept that promise in ways she could never have imagined. He had given her love, security, family, and a home in this beautiful, harsh land that she had come to cherish as much as he did. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes of time. Nathan's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, and Eleanor's eyes weakened so that she needed spectacles for reading. But they still took walks together when the weather permitted, still sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of copper and gold. They were blessed to see great-grandchildren born, tiny babies who would carry their legacy forward into a new century. The ranch remained in the family, thriving under Samuel's management and William's veterinary care. Rose, who never married, became a professor at the university and made Eleanor fiercely proud with her accomplishments. One evening, when Nathan was 73 and Eleanor 71, they sat together on their porch as they had thousands of times before. The sunset was particularly spectacular, the sky ablaze with orange and pink and purple. Nathan held Eleanor's hand, his grip still strong despite his age, and they sat in comfortable silence. Eleanor, Nathan said eventually, his voice soft, I have been thinking. About what? Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. About that day we met, about how I told you I would recover your belongings, including your heart, he chuckled. I was being forward, was I not? We had known each other for all of 15 minutes. You were, Eleanor agreed, but I did not mind. There was something about you, Nathan, a certainty, a confidence, and you kept your promise. You did recover my heart. No, Nathan said, squeezing her hand. You gave it to me. There is a difference. And Eleanor, I want you to know that I have treasured that gift every single day of our life together. Your heart, your love, your trust, they have been the greatest blessings of my life. Eleanor turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her everything, who had shown her what true partnership meant. And you have been mine. I came to Utah looking for a fresh start, but I found so much more. I found home. I found family. I found love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. You gave me a beautiful life, Nathan Ellis. We gave each other a beautiful life, Nathan corrected gently. That is how love works. It is a gift freely given and freely received, growing larger with each passing year. They sat together until the stars came out, bright and clear in the desert sky. Inside the house, they could hear their great-grandson Samuel, named for Nathan's father and their eldest son, playing with wooden blocks while his mother, their granddaughter, hummed a lullaby. The sound was comforting, a reminder that their love had created not just a life together, but generations of lives that would continue long after they were gone. When they finally went inside, Nathan helped Eleanor up the steps, and she leaned on him as she had for so many years. They moved slowly now, their bodies aged but their love as vibrant as ever. In their bedroom, they helped each other undress, a ritual of long familiarity and deep intimacy. Then they climbed into the bed they had shared for 4.5 decades and held each other close. I love you, Eleanor, Nathan whispered into the darkness, today and always. I love you too, Eleanor whispered back. My brave cowboy who gave me back my heart. And who received yours in return, Nathan murmured. The best trade I ever made. They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had countless nights before. And in the morning, they woke to a new day, blessed with each other's presence and the life they had built together. The ranch was stirring to life, cattle lowing in the distance, roosters crowing, children's voices rising in excitement. It was the sound of home, of family, of love that endured through everything. Nathan and Eleanor lived many more years together, into their 80s, blessed with continued health and the joy of watching their family grow. They never forgot the day they met, the robbery that had seemed like disaster but had brought them together. It became a family story, told and retold to children and grandchildren, about how their grandfather had tracked down bandits and recovered their grandmother's belongings, and how he had asked for her heart along with everything else. And did you give it to him? One great-grandchild asked Eleanor when she was 85, her hair white as snow but her mind still sharp. I did, Eleanor said, smiling at Nathan across the room where he sat with one of their great-great-grandchildren on his lap. And he has kept it safe all these years. Just as I have kept his. Nathan met her eyes and smiled, that same dimpled smile that had stolen her breath the very first time she saw it. Always, he said, always and forever. When Nathan finally passed at the age of 87, he died peacefully in his sleep with Eleanor beside him. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, and though her heart broke, she was grateful that they had been together to the end. She had never had to spend a night without him, and she knew that was a gift many couples never received. Eleanor lived for 3 more years, cared for tenderly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days in the house Nathan had built, surrounded by the books they had read together and the memories they had created. And every evening at sunset, weather permitting, she would sit on the porch and look out at the red rocks and endless sky and feel Nathan's presence beside her. When her time came, she went peacefully, her family gathered around her. Her last words were, "I am coming, Nathan. Wait for me." They buried Eleanor next to Nathan in the small cemetery overlooking the valley they had loved. The headstone was simple, inscribed with their names and dates and one line, "Together in life and love forever." The ranch continued in the family for generations. The house Nathan built maintained and cherished as a testament to the love that had created it. The story of Nathan and Eleanor became family legend, passed down through the years as an example of true love born from chance and hardship, nurtured by kindness and trust, and sustained by commitment and joy. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes visit the cemetery and stand before the headstone, trying to imagine what it must have been like in those Wild West days when a cowboy could track down bandits and ask for a lady's heart. And they would look at each other and hope that they might someday find a love as true and lasting as the one Nathan and Eleanor had shared. Because in the end, that was their true legacy. Not the ranch or the books or the material things they had accumulated, but the love they had built together from almost nothing. A love that had started with a robbery and a promise, with a brave cowboy and a determined teacher, with stolen belongings and a heart freely given. A love that had grown and deepened over 50 years of marriage, through joy and sorrow, through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through all the challenges and blessings that life had brought. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Red Rock country of southern Utah in 1883, when the Wild West was still wild and stagecoach robberies were a real danger, and a single act of courage could change 2 lives forever. Nathan had promised to recover Eleanor's belongings, including her heart, and he had kept that promise in every way possible. He had not just recovered her heart but had cherished it, protected it, and loved it for every single day they had together. And Eleanor, for her part, had given him her heart fully and completely, trusting in the goodness she had seen in him from that very first moment. Together, they had built a life that was richer than any amount of money, more valuable than any possession. They had built a love that would endure in the hearts and memories of their descendants for generations to come. The house still stood decades later, maintained by the family as a historical home place. Visitors would sometimes come to see the house that Nathan Ellis had built for his bride, and they would hear the story of how Nathan and Eleanor met. They would see the daguerreotype of Eleanor's parents in its hand-carved frame, still preserved in the parlor. They would walk through rooms where children had played and meals had been shared, and love had been celebrated every single day. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the red rocks glowed with impossible light, people would swear they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch, a tall man and a blonde woman, holding hands and watching the sunset together, just as they had for 50 years of marriage and for all of eternity beyond. Because true love, the kind of love Nathan and Eleanor had shared, never really dies. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the lives we touch, in the legacy we leave behind. It lives on in every act of courage and kindness, in every promise kept, in every heart freely given and tenderly received. Nathan Ellis had ridden up to a robbery in progress with nothing but courage and determination. He had recovered stolen goods for a woman he did not know, and in the process, he had found the great love of his life. Eleanor Ramsey had come to Utah seeking a fresh start, and she had found a home, a family, and a love that sustained her through everything. Their story was extraordinary in its ordinariness, remarkable in its simplicity. They were not famous people or historical figures. They were just a cowboy and a teacher who fell in love in the autumn of 1883, who built a life together in the harsh, beautiful country of southern Utah, who raised children and worked hard and loved each other through everything. But their love became legendary in their family and their community, an example of what was possible when 2 people committed fully to each other and to the life they were building together. The last great-great-grandchild to know Eleanor personally would tell her own grandchildren about the day she asked her ancient great-great-grandmother about love. Eleanor had been 90 then, sitting in her favorite chair with a blanket over her lap, her eyes distant with memory. "What is the secret?" the girl had asked. "How did you and great-great-grandfather stay in love for so long?" Eleanor had smiled, her face a map of wrinkles but her eyes still bright. There is no secret, child. Love is not something you find and keep like a treasure in a box. It is something you build, day by day, choice by choice. Your great-great-grandfather and I chose each other every single day. When things were hard, we chose to work through them together. When things were good, we chose to celebrate together. We chose to be honest, to be kind, to forgive, to grow. That is all love is, really, a series of choices to keep choosing each other. But how did you know he was the right one? The girl had persisted. Eleanor had been quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she said, "Because when he looked at me, I felt seen. Truly seen for exactly who I was. And he did not try to change me or diminish me. He celebrated me, and I did the same for him. We made each other better, stronger, braver. That is how you know, child, when someone makes you feel more yourself, not less." Those words became part of the family legacy too, passed down along with the story of the robbery and the recovery, of the cowboy who asked for a heart and the teacher who gave it. And generation after generation, the descendants of Nathan and Eleanor Ellis looked at their story and believed in the possibility of true love, of finding that one person who would see them and celebrate them and choose them every single day. The Wild West changed, of course. The lawless days gave way to order and civilization. Stagecoaches were replaced by trains and then automobiles. St. George grew from a small frontier town to a thriving city. But through all those changes, the story of Nathan and Eleanor remained constant, a reminder of a time when courage and kindness could change everything, when a chance meeting could become a lifetime of love. And so their story ends not with death but with legacy, not with loss but with love that transcends mortality. Nathan Ellis kept his promise to recover Eleanor Ramsey's belongings, including her heart, and Eleanor gave him that heart freely, trusting in the goodness she saw in him. Together they built a life that was extraordinary in its beauty and simplicity, a love that endured through everything and became legendary in their family and community. They lived, they loved, they built a family and a home, and they left behind a legacy that would inspire generations. And if love can be measured not in years but in joy, not in possessions but in memories, not in what we take but in what we give, then Nathan and Eleanor Ellis were wealthy beyond measure. They had found in each other everything they had been looking for, and so much more they had never dared to dream of. That is the true magic of their story, not the dramatic robbery or the brave recovery, but the everyday miracle of two people choosing each other, loving each other, building a life together one day at a time. It is a story that could have happened anywhere in any time. But it happened in the Wild West, in the Red Rock country of southern Utah, in the autumn of 1883 when a cowboy met a teacher and everything changed. And they lived, truly and fully lived, happily ever after.